And some people are like, oh, AI represents the death of a product manager. And I think that's crazy talk, as if anything, it's going to lead to the golden era of product management. Because product managers and people that understand the domain and what they want to build and have empathy with their users and really understand the problem space and what customers' problems are, that should be gold in the age of AI.
Welcome to Triangle Tweener Talks, a weekly podcast by builders for builders where we explore the startup journey from the idea to the exit and all the lessons in between, with an exclusive focus on founders from the Triangle region of North Carolina. Now here's your host, serial founder and general partner of the Triangle Tweener Fund, Scott Wingo.
Welcome to this episode of Triangle Tweener Talks, part one of a two-part series where we interview Pendo co-founder and the Triangle's only venture studio operator, Eric Boduch. This episode is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, EisnerAmper, formerly HPG, one of the world's largest business consulting firms with a dedicated technology practice offering outsourcing, accounting, tax, and advisory services. Their experienced professionals serve more than 2,000 technology companies, from early-stage startups all the way to public companies. They can also help you with M&A, tax, all those good things. Discover how EisnerAmper can help you by visiting eisneramper.com/tech. Aligned Technology Group, ATG. Are you navigating cloud cost as a startup? Who isn't these days? ATG helps you maximize your AWS Activate credits, where you get up to $100,000 for startups and $300,000 for AI-driven startup businesses. As an AWS Advanced Tier partner, Advanced Technology Group streamlines your cloud journey, optimizes your security, works on your scalability, and all cost efficiently. Startups move fast. We help you build smarter. Unlock your AWS credits today at ATG, Aligned Technology Group. Lithios Apps. Lithios Apps is a Triangle-based software design and development studio that builds custom mobile and web applications focused on quality and user experience. Lithios helps founders and teams bring products to life that drive growth, engage customers, and stand out in very competitive markets. They have worked side by side with clients whose products have gone on to raise millions in follow-on funding. Bank of America. B of A's transformative technology group helps game-changing tech businesses and founders realize their boldest ambitions across a wide range of technology sectors. They offer hands-on support, world-class resources, and an extensive network. B of A provides the stability and scalability that tech companies need to rapidly grow today and into the future. Robinson Bradshaw, a full-service business law firm with a passion for supporting the Triangle's entrepreneurial ecosystem. Learn more about Robinson Bradshaw's startup and venture capital practices at robinsonbradshaw.com. Extensus HR, they are a PEO that stands for Professional Employer Organization. Extensus HR empowers tech founders and growing businesses to scale smarter. They take HR administration off your plate, manage your payroll, do your recruiting, do your employee benefits and retirement plans, work on your compliance, and manage all your risk so that you, the entrepreneur, can focus on innovating. For over 25 years, Extensus HR has leveraged a people-first approach, customer-centric mindset, and deep industry expertise to ensure employers have the tools needed to stay competitive in today's rapidly changing market. Whitley Recruiting Partners. Whitley Recruiting Partners has a special offer. If you have an opening, a special only for Tweener Times subscribers, they will do a survey of that opening and let you know what kind of candidates are available and help you with that. They specialize in recruiting top tech talent for growth stage startups in the Triangle. They target industry-specific entrepreneurial employees who drive immediate results to a fast, accurate, and scalable recruiting process. Visit Whitley Recruiting Partners today to learn more. And an extra special awesome thanks to our friends at Earfluence Walk West, who have partnered with us to produce this podcast. On today's podcast, I'm really excited for you to learn more about Eric Boduch. When you think Pendo, everyone thinks Todd Olson, and rightly so. He's the CEO, the outspoken frontman, also the spokesperson, co-founder. But remember, there are three other founders at Pendo, and one of them is here, and that's Eric. And what's interesting about Eric is he is now quietly building a startup factory, and not a lot of folks in the Triangle are tracking this. I think it's kind of a hidden secret, if you will. In this conversation, we go over Eric's background, how the heck from someone from Pennsylvania went to Carnegie Mellon, ended up in the Triangle founding Pendo with Todd. And then ultimately in 2021, he made the decision to leave Pendo, and we go into some of the details on that. This episode and conversation were so long and dense with great information that we decided to stop at that part in the story. And then in part 2, we're going to pick up the venture studio piece. So you'll hear about all that next week. Eric, welcome to Triangle Talks podcast.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here. I'm excited.
Awesome. Excited to have you. So here on the podcast, we have founders on, and we like to crack open their head and see what makes them tick. So good to have you on the
I've heard my neurologist told me I have a nice brain, so whatever that means, so crack open away.
Nice and pink and squishy. Let's start at the beginning. Where are you from?
Born in Massachusetts, close to the center of the state, but what they call Western Mass. So little town called Wilbraham, home of Friendly ice cream.
Oh, nice.
So if you've ever been to a Friendly's or had their ice cream, that's from my hometown.
Nice. I imagine that's not a city like Boston. It's a very rural part of Massachusetts.
It is. Kind of up in the edge of the Berkshires. And
is it known for cows, thus the ice cream? Is that
No. To my knowledge, there's no cows in town, nor were there when I grew up. Cow-free. There's a turkey farm there somewhere, and a bunch of peaches. Peach farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Down here, peaches are from Georgia. We don't eat those Massachusetts peaches.
Yeah, I think it's a little later season, I think. Yeah. Peaches aren't ready yet in Massachusetts, but definitely ready in Georgia now, I think, right?
Yeah, it's coming in the season.
Yeah.
So what was your childhood like? Were you a nerdy kid, going out and doing sports, a little bit of both?
A mix of both, kind of an interesting mix of both. I think I was, I love sports, played sports, 4 sports every season, right, growing up. But then at the same time was, writing basic code when I was like 7. So, a mix of the two. Definitely a big video game fan. Still play video games when I can carve out some time. But yeah, sports were definitely a big part of my life. Still a big sports fan.
On video games, is this like, are we talking Atari 2600 Pong era or later?
Definitely Atari 2600 era.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then an Apple IIe, was where I was writing BASIC on.
All right, nice.
That was my first
I had a
computer.
2C, which was the portable version, which is hilarious because it looked like a giant laptop, but then it didn't have a screen, so then you had to bring the 80-pound screen. Yeah. So that was portable back in the day.
Yeah, their definition of portable is like, are you a weightlifter? Then it's portable.
Do you have a cart that you can put this thing in? At that point in time, it's kind of unusual to have a computer in your house. Was that something that your dad did, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it was probably unusual to have a computer in the house. I think we were kind of at that stage where it was right in between, right? Like the 2E really opened up home computer ownership. It was definitely something my parents got involved in early as far as, pushing us to that. And it was something I always had a natural attraction to technology as a whole. So it was a good fit.
Yeah. Were your parents technologists, or what did they do?
No, my mom was a teacher. She had her own nursery school. My dad worked for the state of Massachusetts as an arbiter, kind of like a pseudo, not a judge, but worked in deciding cases specifically around unemployment law.
Cool. So then you're growing up in Massachusetts, and I know you went to Carnegie Mellon. How did that come about?
Always a big computer science guy, so wanted to go to a good school for computer science. One of the great things about growing up in Wilbraham, went to a high school called Minnechaug. Go Falcons! They are the Falcons, just to be clear. But a relatively small high school. I mean, our graduating class was 200, but I got 4 years of computer science in there, which was amazing, right? That's something that more than the Apple IIe, it was definitely unusual. Had a great computer science teacher there. Still remember her name, Miss Legarsky, Carol Legarsky. She's since retired, probably long retired. But yeah, she was amazing. And just spending my time around a mix of computers and sports, that was kind of, my time. A little bit of that geeky, sporty guy.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Did you only apply to Carnegie Mellon, or did you apply to other folks?
I almost didn't go to Carnegie Mellon. I actually saw it really late, last minute. I didn't think it was going to be somewhere I wanted to go. My first choice was Cornell, who didn't let me in. Which is weird. I must have wrote a really bad essay because they're like, here's a slam dunk to come in. And then they got my application. So evidently my essay was that bad. Didn't get into Cornell. Thought I would end up at RPI, Rensselaer, and visited Carnegie Mellon and just loved it. Loved Pittsburgh, loved the campus, loved the place. Did a little bit more research on the quality of the school, and then it became instantly my number one choice. But it was kind of a last minute decision. Definitely glad I did it. I mean, great school for computer engineering, computer science.
Yeah. Did you go the science route or the computer engineering route?
Computer engineering route. At the time, my choice was computer engineering. I got to do circuit design, or if I went computer science, I had a lot more math. And I was way more interested in doing things like chip design than I was in, taking, whatever it happened to be, 10 semesters of math. Still had a good chunk of math, but not as much as I would have pure computer science. So went the computer engineering route, which is mostly all computer science classes for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have to take some of the core engineering stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, and all that jazz?
No thermo, all just electrical and computer engineering. And then one outside, I took an intro to civil engineering class. It was my one outside of computers.
Yeah. When did you realize that you want to do more software than hardware? There's kind of like
it was always the path.
Okay, you're always on the software
and
side.
for me, the computer science, computer engineering was, that decision. Do I want a smattering of hardware or do I want a smattering of math on top of the computer science? Because it was more or less the same, and I just jammed full of computer science classes.
Cool.
So.
And then at this point in time, were you thinking you want to be entrepreneurial, or you hadn't really thought about it? You just loved computers and computer science?
I mean, there was always a little bit of an entrepreneurial bug in me. There was a group there, was it Undergraduate Entrepreneurial Association? I think it was UEA, I think it was called, which, probably makes sense. I was involved in that. I sold until Marriott Food Services shut us down. We were selling Subway subs on campus and making some money and doing stuff like that. Yeah. So I always had that bug in me. Did some consulting when I was a junior, senior, for a local manufacturing company. So there was always a little bit of running my own business. Maybe got that from my mom. We ran our own nursery school, but, kind of different, definitely had different kinds of businesses than she ran.
Yeah. So then you graduated, and then where did you go after Carnegie Mellon?
Did a startup with Todd Olson, who's the current CEO of Pendo, or CEO of Pendo, founder, CEO, At the time, he was the CTO of a company called Vision Systems that became Cerebellum. That was our startup right out of school. I'd turned it into a company out of the consulting I was doing. And then we expanded it and turned it into a product company under Todd's technical leadership.
Cool. So how did you meet Todd?
First met him at Carnegie Mellon. He was a year behind me in school. We met through school and then started working together and became good friends.
Gotcha.
So
then where was that company? Is that what bought you down here, or this was up?
No, that was Pittsburgh. Yeah, we both lived in Pittsburgh right after school for a while. So we had that company there. Grew it up to like 60-something people.
Nice.
Almost sold it for a big chunk of change. Had an offer on the table from a public company, and then the market crashed. Well, we were we hired an investment bank, or the board hired an investment bank, and negotiating, shopping the company around to get the best price, and that's when we had the .com crash. So yeah, I went from very wealthy on paper, say 15 million, to poor again.
Yeah. Yep. So, two lessons there. The bird in the hand, sometimes if you have an offer, you can just take that thing and run and don't get greedy. And then the other lesson we always learn as founders is you can't count those chickens till they hatch.
Oh, absolutely. You definitely can't count them till they hatch. I mean, I also had a board member who described it as, well, we should just eat when served, which is probably a good way to put it too. I'm like, well, why don't we just take a great deal on the table instead of hiring an investment bank and running a process? And we could have been out. I mean, we would have still had a bunch of downside from, as a public company, we were going to get a chunk of it in stock, right? There would have been some downside, but we also had access to their secondary that they were running, and so we would have done pretty well all in all. But
yeah, somewhere in the middle, probably.
Yeah.
So at this point in the story, you're probably in your mid-20s, right?
Yeah, like 20. I think maybe Todd was 24, I was 25, give or take a year. Yeah, so we were pretty young. That was some of the reasons. We had a pretty solid board, larger companies, college professors, investors, and they're like, hey, we love what you guys have built, but we should probably have, a real bank running the process. Just, a rational decision to make.
Yeah. just kind of screwed you over in this example.
Hey, you never know. The bankers thought we had an offer around 60, and they thought they could get 150. So that's a big number. It was an inflated number, but still,
Yeah.
it was an inflated time in the market too. So
Bankers are always incented to put a big number out to get the business. They
absolutely.
never get fired for saying 150 and doing 70.
And yeah, exactly. And they had 60 as kind of their floor, at least as far as an offer. So, but we probably should have, as one board member later put it, back to that eat when served comment. It was good deals. It was good fit with the company, good opportunity. Some well-regarded tech leaders were in the company was making the offer. Would have been a good thing to do. We should have just signed it in the room. Todd and I actually had that discussion right as it was happening. It's like, we should just do this deal and get it done now. And we didn't. So
Corporate governance for the win.
Yeah.
Did you have a board because you'd raised VC, or you just felt like you guys wanted to have some?
We had raised a good chunk of money. At that point, it was mostly corporate money. We had some corporate investors in what we were doing, and some high net worth individuals. We had a little bit of VC in at that point, and we raised some VC after that. But there wasn't a ton of VC there. But there was board members because of those investments. And we had a board right from the beginning. One of my mentors from Carnegie Mellon, Jack Roseman, who's a great businessman and business professor at the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, was on the board from right around the get-go. So.
Yeah. You're 24, 25. You've had this experience. Did that mess with your head?
No, not really. I mean, I think...
So you thought you were rich and then you were poor?
Yeah. I think not having the exit probably less messed with my head than having the exit. You worry if all of a sudden, you have a significant amount of money, you become that arrogant prick, right? When I was, that 25-year-old kid, right, that didn't know a lot.
Yeah. Cool. So then what did you do after that?
Well, I looked at starting another company, because once that bug's in and you're doing it. Now, post.com crash wasn't the easiest time to raise money. We raised a little bit, did some consulting, actually around product management, more roadmap and feature requests and that whole side of the business. Never really were able to raise enough to turn it into a real company. And then Todd went and came down here with TogetherSoft.
And what'd you do?
I was doing the consulting stuff for the product management side. So I ran that for a few years. Never really turned it into like a real company. We had a little bit of software, a little bit of consulting, raised a tiny bit of money, from some angels. And then we ended up merging it or looking to merge it with a company in San Francisco that had raised a little bit more and was working in the same space. But then their financing fell through and that company went away.
Was that ProductSoft, Cerebellum?
ProductSoft was the consulting company I had started. Yeah, Cerebellum was the one Todd and I had done. And then this company I think was called TrueRec at the time, though they were going to take the ProductSoft name for True Requirements, not for Crash. Though I guess it ended up like ProductSoft kind of just crashing, not turning into anything. And then from there, a friend hired me and to convince me to interview at a public company called Embarcadero. Worked there for a little while. It was very corporate in structure. It wasn't exciting for me. And then left there to run marketing at a company called Vitria, which I really enjoyed from a standpoint of it was running an executive function at a time public company. They've since then taken private, having exposure to a lot of international that I never had at the early, the .com startups tended to be US centric, a little bit different than today. But, we had an office in Tokyo. So that was my first trip to Asia and Japan and running that. And I had a team member there. We had a big group in Europe. So doing sales training for the European sales team and all that was a new experience for me. So that international marketing was interesting. And then helping write the narrative around, the analyst calls, right? Being a public company was very interesting, helping our CEO position the company and try to set up the next call. Like, what are we going to say we're going to do that we know we're going to deliver for the next call and start building more momentum around the company. Those kind of experiences were all new to me and really interesting. Yeah. So, and running user conferences. Like at that time, as a startup today, you would do them when you're relatively small, but back then it was larger companies that were doing them. So running a conference in Vegas and then doing one in, we did a European conference in Nice. Those were great experiences.
Yeah. So through this journey, so when you and Todd had the company, were you writing code still? You were both coding?
I wrote a little bit when we first started as I kind of transitioned from, being a consultant to being a CEO of a startup. So then a lot less code and more on the sales and marketing side of the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like, in this part of the journey, as you get into Embarcadero and then Vitria, you're squarely in the marketing side of things.
Yeah, a mix of marketing and product. At Vitria, we drove some of the product direction there too from the marketing team.
Yeah.
It was back in the day of where does product belong? They belong in an engineering organization, the marketing organization. It wasn't as often that product was its own org, which is where I think it should be, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And every company has a different definition for product marketing and product management. And then
yes, especially back then.
Project management. So you've got three things called PM, which is confusing.
Yeah, it definitely is confusing. And there's a blur, between product marketing and product management, where that line is in particular. I think, less people get trained formally from places like Pragmatic, I think, these days in the product management space, but I think they do a good job of defining that. They used to have a box diagram, one of those one sheet kind of things you put on your desk of like, here's all the areas of responsibilities for product management and product marketing, and you could kind of move that line around a little bit.
Yeah.
Pragmatic always did a good job. At the time, it was Pragmatic.
I've seen their stuff, yeah.
Yeah, specifically around product management, but then they expanded the company. I think to some extent lost the focus, but they were always the go-to on insights and process for product management back in those days. We're talking a while ago, but still, I think a solid organization on that side.
Yeah.
Had some great instructors that came out of there and went into, different spaces in the industry. So.
Cool. So you're at Vitria, you're doing your marketing, you're learning public company and doing some international. And then you started Smash Technologies in 2007. Tell us, how did that come to be and what is
Smash? Yeah, a friend of mine from school, Chanu Damarla Chanaka, Carnegie Mellon guy, had started a company around text messaging. And he needed some help. I was leaving Vitria. They were in the process of going private. And made sense for me to help him. Jumped over there. He was in Pittsburgh. I was still in San Francisco. So we're kind of running the business back and forth that way. I was the only one in San Francisco, I think, at the time. We had an advisor there. But I was flying back and spending more time in Pittsburgh. All my family was East Coast, and inevitably I ended up moving back to Pittsburgh.
So Smash Technologies, tell us, was it like a Twilio kind of thing, or?
Yeah, well, we started it more. I mean, it was probably closer to like what, eventually became a company like Klaviyo. So we did a platform for brands to be able to use text messaging with things like shortcodes. We're kind of like in between. It was like too early for the Klaviyos of the world. And, maybe on the later side for, there was what were called, aggregators at the time that would connect you to all the different cellular networks. It was too late to participate in that kind of area. It probably wasn't the greatest of timing for SMS. You couple that with the fact that right after we launched the company, or right after I joined the company, Chanu had been working on it for a while. The iPhone was announced, so it became, hey, we're not doing text messaging, we're doing apps. And it wasn't quite to the point where SMS was thought about in the same way for outreach for brands to use. And that came later with companies like Klaviyo.
Yeah. Was this venture backed, and what was the outcome of what
raised a little bit of money. We're trying to merge it with another company, and then just kind of ended up shutting it down. So, but never raised venture money, but did raise money from some angels. Yeah. So it was an interesting ride. Probably hung in that business too long, trying to make it work for, some of the early investors we had. Chanu ended up leaving, so I was kind of like the co-founder CEO that got brought in to run it, was left there,
Thanks, bud.
Yeah. I spent a lot of probably too many years trying to make Smash work. There's something to be said for grit and grind, but there's also something to be said for like it just doesn't have all the pieces to make it work. And if you can't get the pieces put in place, you're spending a lot of, your prime years doing something that maybe isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah. It looks like you were acqui-hired by Mind Matrix up there in Pittsburgh as well.
Yeah. I'm not sure that deal ever really got consummated. At that point, I kind of stepped back out of things. But we were going over there with the intent of getting a deal done. And eventually just closed down shop.
At some point here, you're going to join Pendo. I think we're about at that part of the story.
Yeah. So, I started, working with Todd to figure out what we were going to do next, and ended up joining Pendo first part-time just because we were trying to conserve cash.
And he was Post-Cerebellum and then...
Post-Cerebellum, post-Raleigh. Yeah.
Raleigh, yeah.
Yeah, Borland in between with
gotcha.
that
Raleigh
acquisition.
software,
Yeah.
Okay, so he calls... Were you guys... And I think there's a
We'd always talked about doing another startup together. So Todd and I started throwing around some ideas. Our original idea was a little closer to doing something like Anaplan or adaptive planning, which wasn't really a space either of us were particularly excited about. But we actually did a first pitch to that to Core Capital, which became our early investor. We got Raul involved in that point. Raul Jain was the third co-founder. He had been doing work over at Core and been doing some consulting.
So it's kind of an EIR that kind of glommed onto.
Yeah, I forget his actual, what his relationship was at Core at that point. It's hard to remember, but he had worked with Core at some point. Todd had raised money for a startup he had done in between that whole process called 6 Cents. I think it was called 6 Cents, but not the existing 6 Cents that's out there. Yeah. That ended up not going anywhere, but got bought out by Raleigh Software, which is what brought him there. And then we ended up pulling in Eric Trone a couple months into things, before we incorporated and set up the company. But as we were working through the idea, so it was the four of us kicking off Pendo now in, 2013. Todd and I started working on ideas early in that or July of that year. And then I didn't join them full time just because it was early to have a marketing person. But I was like that board member, advisor, until we raised the capital that could afford to pay me.
Cool. And is that when so you're in Pittsburgh, Todd was here.
I was in Pittsburgh.
Is that when you moved down to the Raleigh-Durham area?
When my daughter hit college. So I was a remote co-founder for a while.
Okay.
There was always a desire on the VC side to move both Raul and I. My time period was as soon as my daughter went to college, I would come down to Raleigh. At some point, they stopped caring. Raul never moved to Raleigh. Once the business was up and rolling, there was less concern. And you start adding offices. Pendo had, added an office in New York, and then we had an office in San Francisco, and then 2 offices now in the UK, and one in Israel, and Sydney, and Tokyo, and it's a lot less important where people are.
Yeah.
So obviously we didn't have all of those early, but it becomes less and less important as the companies are distributed across multiple offices. So, but yeah, Raul's still living in DC.
Cool. So then, and is he still at Pendo?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And is the other Eric still at Pendo?
Everybody's there but me.
Oh, you're the odd man out.
Yeah, I am.
We'll talk about that.
Bad decision making. No, I don't know. Pendo's amazing. I would have been happy staying there, but, ended up choosing to start the venture studio.
Yeah. So you start Pendo after about a year. So you're just kind of hanging out on the side. Then about a year, you come in, run marketing.
Yeah.
Did you, at that point, was the product solidifying and you had a vision?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We built product quick, had product in customers' hands pretty quick. Yeah, it was pretty solid.
Yeah, and then you guys, as a startup, you want to define a category. And I don't know if this was your marketing genius, or I'm sure you'll take credit for it, but
I probably won't take credit for it. I would say we didn't define a category. I would say we struggled around defining a category and what we would name that category and how we'd position it. We went through a lot of different permutations of how we describe ourselves. And I don't know that there was an early category. We talked about things like product success. We talked about product experience. We talked about, product management software is kind of a space in and of itself. But the category itself, I don't know, was particularly well defined in the early days, and even now.
Yeah. As an outsider, it seemed like you guys kind of built this quadrant around product experience and having, there was dev tech, which was developers, then there was sales and martech, but there was nothing for that product management.
Yeah, I would say our persona was always really well defined, right? We wanted to say, we wanted to be a product manager's best friend. We wanted to be the product that, product managers loved. We wanted to be, their go-to resource. We wanted to solve all of their problems. So our persona was always strongly in product management, with some secondary users because of the product data we had, things like customer success. So ICP was always really well defined. The category, the naming, Gainsight had customer success pretty early on. We didn't have that kind of well-defined category nomenclature, naming.
Yeah. A lot of tech founders struggle this flipping from I'm going to build a technical product and then figuring out the marketing message. How did you pick up all these skills? Like, how did you learn about personas and how to define your ICP? And because you have a computer engineering background.
Yeah, I had spent even going back to Cerebellum, the marketing fell to me, that side of the house. So, it was learned by doing. A lot easier to do today with all the resources that are out there from,
it's not fair. Like, we had to struggle to learn all this stuff. And now there's books for everything.
There's
infinite
a little bit of that.
resources.
Definitely when I was 24, 25 and someone was like, this is what marketing is. I was like, well, that's not what we're doing, but that's what we probably should be doing, back in the Cerebellum days. But definitely learned from, kept learning from there, learning at Embarcadero, learning, from Cerebellum, just hands-on experience, continuing to learn about what it meant to manage a marketing team at I think that we had a team of 11 or 12 at one point at Vitria. So learned from that and took those experiences. And then, we were just, we were figuring things out as we want, as that, SaaS marketing took place. I think we were doing some things that were, on the front end of things. Everything from, I feel like we were the first person that drove at scale socks as giveaways, which are always a big hit. It's little random weird things. People still show me Pendo socks that they have, which is kind of funny.
Part of marketing is being different, right?
Yeah, it is being different.
You can't just do another pen with your logo on it.
Well, a lot of marketing is finding things that currently work and then they change, right? You want to build something that works and keep doing it until it stops working, but you want to keep building out channels that work, right? We did a lot with small events, things like product camps. I heard Pendo's back to doing some of those, which is great, some of the grassroots product camps. But early on, I was spending a lot of Saturdays in random cities, Chicago, Seattle, Vancouver, all those places that were running local product camps, those kind of unconferences where we would, more or less donate, pay a couple $100 to have a table, with a little tablecloth and be pitching our, what we do for product managers. So,
yeah. Where'd the little pink dinosaur come from?
Oh, well, pink came early, the color first.
Let's go back even further. What's your memory of where Pendo came from?
Yeah, Pendo, the name came from Todd. I think, it meant to measure value in Latin. It turns out it also means love in Swahili. So that we definitely played up with, build products your customers love, all that kind of stuff. We played up the love. We had already, coming out of some inspiration from Marketo, who owned the color purple. We thought a lot about, colors. And there was a local company that kind of went heavy on the green side of things. At the time, what was it, Windsor Circle, I think?
Green pants.
Yeah, exactly. We had bought Todd pink pants, I think some golf pants to wear at an early conference. But, we started with this idea of we were thinking about color, and I probably would have gone a little more traditional if it was my choice back then. But Todd's like, hey, let's go pink. I think he thought of pink as an accent color. Let's work pink in as an accent color. I'm like, hey, I started thinking about it. I was like, I think pink's a great idea. Going back to Marketo had purple and really used that. We dove into pink, and it was kind of a unique color for tech at the time, especially for software tech. So we went pink as primary, pink heavy, pink everywhere, pink t-shirts, pink booth, eventually pink dinosaur. So it was really heavy pink. It set us apart from a brand perspective. We got a lot more bang for our brand buck, where even conferences I wasn't sponsoring, I'd run into someone who was like, oh, I saw you at XYZ conference, and they just saw someone wearing pink and assumed it was Pendo. So we had that. I got a lot of kudos from the brand we established early. Heavy around being that best friend of product manager, trying to build tools to make their life better, really thinking it through their eyes and their lens. And all of us having some kind of product background. Todd heavy on the product, Raul spending time on product, me owning some of product along with marketing, Eric Trone doing product along with engineering in past lives. We had a lot of empathy for product managers. And it was at the time too where I think people understood how important product was, but didn't necessarily, it was beginning to be a point where product was super important, but wasn't entirely well recognized by everyone in the software space, the importance of having a strong product organization. So we were able to push on that pretty heavily too.
Excellent. So then, so you established the brand, the pink, the dinosaur came along.
Yeah, the dinosaur kind of came as a one-off. We quickly needed a t-shirt, and we did a lot of t-shirts.
Yeah.
And I don't even know who came up with the tagline of a dinosaur with a, don't let your product go extinct, right? And people love the dino t-shirt. So, you got to give people more of what they love. So that turned into eventually a 9-10 foot tall pink dinosaur that we had outside SaaStr, much to the organizers' dismay at the beginning. But then Lemkin loved it afterwards, so it was all good. But
it's guerrilla marketing at its best.
We did a bunch of that. I mean, yeah, we were pretty aggressive in how we looked at marketing. I had a lot of fun doing that,
Yeah, cool. And then on LinkedIn, it says at 2017, you relinquished the marketing position. Was that you kind of felt like you were getting all your ski tips, or you wanted to do something different, or was it just kind of a mutual type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a harder question to answer. I think Todd was looking for someone that had a different approach to how we were thinking about marketing. And frankly, it was hard doing marketing with Todd at that point. So, I mean, I think it worked out well. I mean, one of my good friends, Jake, I wasn't a good friend at the time. I didn't know him. But he came on board and we became good friends afterwards to run marketing. And then I took over, and I was already spending a lot of time on the road, doing community customer stuff, doing workshops. And so I just doubled down on that side of the business. We launched our podcast, which I still run into people today, that talk about product love. It's a great podcast. Love doing that. So it was spending a lot of time with customer community evangelism. So it was a nice little transition into that. And it added to our management team. Bringing Jake in as CMO was a huge benefit to the team. It was great.
Yeah, when you're growing as fast as Pendo has, there's plenty of food on the plate for,
Oh, there's lots of things. There's lots of things for everybody to do.
Yeah,
there's no issues there. Yeah.
So the org, imagine in those go-go days, is just like, what was it like? What do you remember? Was this what you expected, or has it dramatically exceeded your expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably dramatically exceeded all of our expectations when we were first starting Pendo. We thought it would be a nice product that we could build and eventually sell. And I think we did a really good job executing, especially in those early years, going from 0 to 1, from 1 to 4.3, from 4.3 to 13. Like, that growth rate was pretty awesome. A lot for us all to be happy about. And then Jake on the marketing side took over at that point, and Joe, and extended that even farther. Bill Binch joined us as CRO. Chaz, who's our original head of sales, stayed on for a long time doing, different spots in the sales. He ran Europe for us from some point. So we just kept getting great people involved in the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about company culture? Everyone raves about the Pendo company culture. Did you have a hand in that? Or was that all Todd?
Yeah, I mean, I think founders have to drive culture. And one of the early employees was a huge driver of culture too, Shannon Bauman, who's the first guy who ran product at Pendo. It's kind of interesting. You have 4 founders that have some background in product. Todd extensively, the rest of us a little bit less than that, but still one of our first hires was a head of product. Ex-Google guy, big culture guy. He helped us drive the culture. core values and culture were always really important. And I don't think you realize how important culture is until you try to grow really quickly. Like at one point after we had raised money from Battery, we went from 14 people to, or maybe 12 people, 14 people. It's a little blurry these days, to like say 30 people within 40 days, right? So you think about the extent of that hiring, and you just think about the interview schedules. We would have multiple people coming in from every position. We were, Todd was still interviewing everyone at that point. I was interviewing a lot of it, not everybody, but close, and Eric and Raul and frankly, all the employees. You're having 4 different employees, say, on average, interview someone, maybe 5. That's a lot of interviews. And getting that right as you hire those people and then try to incorporate them into the business, a lot of it has to be because you have that strong culture, core values to point to, and kind of a Pendo way of doing things. I mean, my marketing team went from, I was a one-man band until we raised our Series A, right? We were already doing, by the time we hired someone into marketing, I think we're at 700, or someone beyond me into marketing, I think we're already at 750K of ARR. So it was like me as the marketing guy.
Yeah.
And that's without all these AI tools and everything else, and frankly, just a lot less SaaS infrastructure.
Yeah.
So one-man band at that point, and then I added 3. Was it 3 right off the bat? Yeah, 3 right off the bat. So it was like my team went from 1 to 4, within 45 days.
Yeah.
So it's crazy integrating.
First 90 days is a train wreck because your productivity goes to 0 because you're just busy trying to.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
Right. So it was just work more, work harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sink or swim, figure it out.
There isn't, there definitely isn't work-life balance at certain points, right? Over the time, Pendo, was there some of that? Sure. But was there a work-life balance then? No.
No, there's like, you're in the,
it was work
heavy sprint mode.
Yeah. Try to get work-sleep balance at least. So
yeah. Then it looks like, when was it? 2021 is kind of like when you phased out, say, or you were GM of something called Adopt for a while. What was that? Yeah,
so took over Adopt, which is our second. Now it's called Pendo for Employees. I started Adopt, which was a business opportunity within Pendo that we started as an OEM piece of our business, specifically going after how we can bring Pendo guides and analytics to packaged software.
Got it.
So
okay.
Cool. So it was a big
What's
second
an
act for
example
us.
of packaged software?
Like Salesforce.
Okay.
Right? Like if Salesforce or SAP is not a customer of us, but you still want to build your own custom guides for how your business uses SAP.
So it's internal facing into the business. Of
exactly.
Here's how we're a GM and we use Salesforce.
Yeah, I think of it as like this. Like the first step of Pendo was helping people build better software, right? So if you are a software builder like Marketo or Home Depot even, right? People building software, we help you do it better. We help you get the analytics, we help you guide your users, and all of that is part of your, commercial or internal software package. And then the second part of that is people, or the second side of that coin, right, is people use software. And it might not be software that's built with Pendo. It might even be software that's built with Pendo, but you as, say, Bank of America, are big users of software, a huge amount of software. So how do you help your employees use that software better? Well, Pendo can help there too. So that's the second piece of the business. How do you utilize and help your employees get more value from their software they're using every day? And that is a natural step from how do we help companies build better software?
Yeah, in this world of SaaS glut where, people look and suddenly you've got 80 SaaS applications you're using. Many of them don't get any usage. It's super helpful to have something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge market for doing that better. I think, more companies should be looking at that. And I think Pendo has a huge amount of upside in that space and going after it. And they've continued to build out a really robust product. I mean, when I was there, we added things like, roadmap and feature requests and that whole side of the business. You get feedback on products, things like surveys. I would say probably the average customer doesn't even know the full capabilities of the Pendo platform, session management, session replay, all that kind of stuff. Now companies should be thinking about like, hey, how can I work with Pendo to build my AI offering, right? If Pendo's capturing all my usage analytics and we capture everything, which is kind of unique in the industry, that's a good data set that Pendo customers should be going back to Pendo for and being like, hey, can you help me build my AI product on top of this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the data is going to be it's the gold dust.
Yeah, there's
forward.
an interesting opportunity, I think, for Pendo and the data that they already capture for people.
Yeah. So in 21, you phased out of Pendo on the day-to-day, and you're so say a little bit about that, whatever you're comfortable saying, and then you're still on the board?
No, I haven't been on the board for a while as we raise VC, internal
VC
board.
always wants to come
up. So like early board member, and then we went down to, I think there's 2 internal Pendo seats, Todd and Eric Trone. But yeah, I lost my seat a long time ago. Still went to all the board meetings, but up until me leaving, but wasn't an official board member. Yeah, so I mean, I think at the time, Pendo was growing. I was figuring out what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to, continue there and take a larger role with Adopt, a larger role around the channel business. There was a bunch of opportunities, which naturally made me think of like, what do I want to do next with my life? Always wanted to run a venture studio. So sat down with Todd and said, hey, I'm thinking about leaving. Gave him a ton of notice. I think between that conversation and me not getting paid, it was like leaving the company, it was like 6 months. And I still did some work for them for a couple months after that. So it was a long transition period out. Todd and I are still great friends.
Still a large shareholder, I imagine.
Yeah, still a large shareholder.
Now you're on the investor side waiting for that exit.
I mean, I don't know as much as I'm waiting. I would like a little more liquidity, but I do think Pendo could be, a huge company. Like there's an opportunity to build
$10 billion company.
Yeah. I mean, our last round was done, whatever was announced, that was like 2-point-something billion, right? I'm forgetting now if it's 2.4 or 2.6, whatever the number was, or the valuation was announced the last time, but we're talking about back in 2021, right? This is a long time ago. I think there's an opportunity that Pendo could be a $20 billion company. I think product is arguably more important than sales, right? And you look at how big Salesforce has grown, could we build a really huge company for software? I mean, building software is the manufacturing of this next generation, right?
Yeah, and you can paint a scenario with the cost to build software going to zero thanks to AI. Taste and product management becomes more important because it's got to work. You've got to really get better at measuring the customer experience and all that stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we look at this and some people are like, oh, AI represents the death of a product manager. And I think that's crazy talk, as one of my old professors or friends used to say. It's crazy talk thinking it's the death of product managers. If anything, it's going to lead to the golden era of product management. Because product managers and people that understand the domain and what they want to build and have empathy with their users and really understand the problem space and what customers' problems are, that should be gold in the age of AI. If anything, it becomes more important than it was in the past 10 years. So I think we are going to, I have the contrarian view maybe on that. I think we're entering the golden age of product managers, and maybe the term manager, like you can start nitpicking the word, but the role, if you look at the definition of the role, even going back to that old pragmatic, one sheet, that stuff is super important, right? Doing that effectively is super important. And some of the stuff has changed a little bit. Do we write back in the early days, I was writing MRDs and PRDs and all that kind of stuff in large detail. Do we do that in the same way? No, but are all of those things still important? Like the concepts behind them? Absolutely. And I think we're going to move more and more to understanding that product managers are even more important in building software.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be a taste and kind of a human touch is going to be what separates in a sea of computer-generated products.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Pendo could be a $100 billion company, and I think Todd could be a CEO to drive it there.
Yeah, he's definitely very focused on getting to his end point there. Keep growing.
Yeah.
So why were you interested in venture studios, and what is a venture studio?
I became friends with a couple of VCs back from the Cerebellum days. One in particular that we ended up not doing a deal with because we had gotten that acquisition offer. The acquisition offer came at the same time we had a VC deal that we were negotiating our way through, which didn't make the VC necessarily happy. This guy by the name of Bill Hawley, who's not a VC these days, has since left and retired. I think retired, but definitely left the VC business. Haven't talked to Bill in a while, but shout out to Bill. He's always a great guy to talk to, a great friend, back in the day. Haven't talked to him in ages. But I was always interested in that space, but still an entrepreneur at heart. So how can you get a little bit of the blend, like do entrepreneurship in parallel? And that seemed like what, venture studios or startup studios or whatever you want to call them, would do. So, thought about that when we were starting Pendo, just didn't think we had the experience and the credibility, to be able to do that at that point. And I think, we'll get to this in a minute, and maybe we just put a pin in it. I think to run a venture studio and be a principal or a GP, you have to have a certain background. And I didn't think I had that, right, when we were starting Pendo. I hadn't done the Pendo-like experience. I hadn't brought a company from 0 to 40 million or 0 to 100 million or 0 to 250 million, plus like Pendo is today. Like I hadn't had that Pendo experience, right? So I had had the negative experiences that I think are also, important, and the experiences that are important. Like having multiple experiences in starting companies, I think is important for a founder or the CEO or partner at a venture studio. But I didn't have that Pendo experience. And there's something to be said about having that experience of high growth startups. So I didn't know that the time was right to start one there. And Pendo was a great idea. I loved it. We loved it from the get-go. So now, fast forward to, leaving Pendo, I had that experience, and I thought I had the credibility to start a venture studio.
Okay, thanks for listening to part 1 of this 2-part series with Eric Boduch. We're going to pause there for this week. As a reminder, Eric's left Pendo, and now we'll be starting a venture studio. What's a venture studio? What are some of the companies that have come out of that? How do they operate it? We're going to learn more about that next week.
For more tweener content, check out the Triangle Tweener Time Substack at tweener.substack.com. For more tweener content, check out tweenertimes.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon on Triangle Tweener Talks.